So with that, I will open the public hearing and call Mark Krause.
Thank you. With regard to the time, I intend to come well under 25 minutes on direct, so if we could reserve the time for rebuttal, we'd appreciate that.
A maximum of 5 for rebuttal.
Okay. And I think the most useful time will be questions. We've got a number of experts here you can hear from on the geosciences side, environmental side, so I want to shift my time to that effort. Begin by saying we really want to...
Your name for the record.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mark Krause with Pacific Gas and Electric. And I want to begin by thanking staff. I mean, clearly a great number of hours, and I can speak personally, late and early hours. So great effort by staff, very much appreciated. Obviously disagree with the recommendation, but we'll make a quick position. If I can move to slide 2. I want to emphasize that PG&E didn't come to this with this legislation. It was the first time we thought about seismic issues. We've had a robust program since 1984 at Diablo Canyon. Our 12-member geosciences team includes geologists, engineers, a number of others who do this not only for Diablo Canyon, but for our hydroelectric facilities. These are experts, a world-renowned program at Pacific Gas and Electric. So I think if we can slip to the next slide, I will explain that this is the background. This is the why we're here. And certainly, as you've heard in ex parte, we're here because we've been directed to be here. Initially, when the Energy Commission was considering the recommendation to do this enhanced imaging, PG&E opposed it, tried to get that out of the recommendations, saying we've got adequate technology here. We feel we have the right technology, and we really resisted that. It was at a point when the cacophony of voices said, you need to do this and you need to do this before you proceed with license renewal. We realized it wasn't our position to tell the folks in the Central Coast that our technology was good enough. So we met with the Coastal Commission staff. They explained that really the process would be first getting approval and a fully certified environmental impact report from the State Lands Commission, which we did over about a 15-month period, much public notice, public hearings, that kind of thing. But we can switch to the next slide now and go into that briefly. This is the full suite of programs that we're doing as part of the CEC recommendations. High energy, what you're being asked for today, is just one piece of that. We've done onshore high energy work, both 2D and 3D. We've done offshore low energy 3D work. And this is, I'm going to anticipate the issues that staff raised and said they don't have enough information. Essentially saying, why haven't you analyzed the additional data that you've collected or old data, sort of misses the point that they're different targets. The high energy work that we want to do, that this permit would allow us to do, addresses 7 miles below the Earth's crust, what those faults are doing, both the angle, the dip of the fault, and that tells us, as was explained earlier, whether it goes underneath the plant, but also whether multiple faults, separate faults, are in fact either are one fault at depth or are close enough to one another that they would rupture and join and become a larger fault. And I think one commissioner reported it is standard, and our seismologists can speak to this, it's standard understanding that a single fault has a larger potential magnitude but lower likelihood of occurrence, so probability is low. So I want to, that's the focus on state lands. That's the program. Part of this was approved by state lands, ocean bottom seismometers and some other things. If we can switch to the next slide. Next slide. This was the larger 3-box configuration. This is the big project we would have liked to have before you. This is what state lands approved, and you can see box 4 at the top there. They actually deleted another box to the north of all of that, calling that 3-box instead of 4-box configuration the environmentally preferred alternative. So we already had that aspect at state lands in a fully certified EIR. Flip to the next page, and I want to talk. So this gives you the differences between what state lands approved and what we have before you now. State lands, we would have been allowed to do all 3 boxes in this year if possible, could have trailed them into next year, 33 days of operation, some activity within MPA, marine protected areas, and higher mammal densities certainly in the other 2 boxes. We've selected box 4 on the basis of its shortest duration out of the 3 boxes, lowest mammal densities, the ship does not pass in any MPA, and significantly here, and this is what I believe the 6 out of 7, I believe it is, of the IPRP members said, It allows us to prove the technology that we've selected here as the right tool for this job. I don't want to go too deeply into Supervisor Gibson's contentions. We can do that in answering your questions later. But essentially, that 10-streamer array, this is not the terrain for that. I mean, you cannot, we need a finer scalpel here. And so I'll address that a little bit in a moment. And then the important part also about Box 4, and that last point, is it may obviate the need for the additional surveys, for surveys next year. If we get certain of these questions answered in certain ways, we can say boxes 2 and 1 are unnecessary. Flipping on to the next slide then, please. What is the benefit of high energy 3D? I mean, for some folks, you may have heard this as, oh, you know, it's this geologist in search of more data, and that has been one characterization of it. But if you live near a nuclear plant, wouldn't you want more certainty in the assumptions that are being made? I mean, we believe it's going to be bringing the current bounding downward so that the risk that we currently estimate is actually reduced. But the purpose of these studies, we wouldn't be doing these studies if we believed we were 100% sure about everything. So I just present that to you, and I think that is the purpose for the high energy study. Moving on to the next slide. In terms of environmental impact, this is the fully certified EIR from state lands. I have already said much of this, but permit would be allowed over 2 years. The key part is that they found less than significant long-term impacts. That is the finding of the state lands fully certified EIR. I know staff has raised other issues for you. We can address those in a moment and on questioning. They did condition dozens of mitigation measures, and staff has gone into some of those. I would point out that the red circle that you saw, that was one of the smallest circles on the map that staff had put up, that 2/3 mile radius, that's the equivalent, the 180 decibel level is the equivalent of a cruise ship passing through those waters, you know, in proximity. But that's the same thing we're doing. We're creating that sound source. The other thing, and this has been said at the Fish and Game Commission and in other arenas, this is the greatest impact of human-created sound that we've ever seen, as if it's never before seen. It is seen all the time in bridge construction projects. Bridge piling is a 250 decibel sound source. So I'm not telling you we're not going to have an impact. I'm simply pointing out that these studies are not the first of their kind. In fact, there are 25 of these that are concurrently permitted by NIMFs around the United States, in U.S. waters, that are going on 6 weeks ago, according to the gentleman from the University of Nevada, Reno, who can speak to some of that. Flipping the next page, much the same point in the federal environmental assessment, the environmental document performed by the National Science Foundation in consultation with NOAA, NIMS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and your staff in consultation, I should say, with your staff, concluded that the 3-box survey would proceed with box 4 only. And that does have to do with harassment levels that they felt were too high if you did all of the boxes. And that's the reason, again, for the selection of box 4 is that it falls below the threshold levels for NIMS and NOAA on harassment. And we expect permitting to be coming soon. I do want to correct the one thing, the one statement in ex parte. I believe our environmental expert can testify to this, but it was a random sampling of otters. It certainly wasn't every otter that was implanted. and again, not PG&E doing that. That is U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NIMS NOAA. Flipping to the next slide, I think I can kind of shortcut these. There are two main contentions in the 5 points that staff raises about couldn't you have gotten this better? Couldn't you have gotten this to a lower environmental impact? The first is the use of more geophones, and our response is an emphatic no. Had we used more geophones, we'd be looking at thousands of geophones that would have reduced some of the ship passage. But what we were told both by this commission, by Fish and Game Commission and the Department of Fish and Game and some of our other folks, the hard bottom and sandy bottom habitats there are very sensitive, and placing those sea phones there was at a premium in any of as part of our earlier plan. So that was not an alternative. That we think there are bigger trade-offs in placing the sea phones, geophones, pardon me. On the data analysis, the questions are geared at existing data sets, so the historic data sets, some of which PG&E and USGS collected, some of which oil industry folks have collected over the years. Could you have taken that data and analyzed it under new technology and reduced either the duration or the extent of your impact? There again, an emphatic no. We've done that to pick our targets. We've certainly analyzed it as best it can be used because those data sets are not complete as the stuff we would collect now. But we've done that to pick our targets, but in terms of size, box 4 is as small as it can possibly be in terms of both width and length. So even with more data, it wouldn't have gotten any smaller. Same issue with regard to the data we've collected both onshore and the low energy offshore. Further analysis of that data, could that reduce the impacts here? No, apples and oranges. We're talking about different targets. So what has been collected onshore, of course, goes to the onshore faulting. But the low energy offshore work speaks to, of course, a shallower depth and much more about slip rate than about what we're looking for here, the dip angle of faults and whether or not faults join at depth. So these are kind of just disconnects from our perspective. And finally, 2 of the questions were oriented to the technology selection. And I think the fastest summary, and some of you have heard this, but I don't think all of you, we did more or less a full trial at the State Lands Commission, both before the meeting and ex partes before the 3 State Lands Commissioners and at the meeting. And PG&E was able to convince the commissioners that, as one commissioner put it, he'd received some medical treatment out of the country. And when he came back, he went to his doctor. It was a broken leg, it was an orthopedic procedure. And he went to his doctor and he said, did they do it right? And the doctor said, this is one of the State Lands Commissioners telling this story, he didn't do it like I would have done it, but I say he did it right. And I think that's what we're up against here. It's really geologists, seismologists saying, you know, there's another way you could do this. I don't think it's at all clear that that would be better either environmentally. We do not believe it would be the best way to target to approach these particular seismic targets. And on that point, it's not just we believe. We developed this study plan with Columbia University, who operates the vessel, with Scripps Oceanography, with the University of Nevada, Reno. Dr. Graham Kent is here. Dr. Kent has been on the very survey vessel that we're using just this last summer. Some of the things that were raised earlier. He can give you answers in questions to any of that. So I think that addresses the question of, should we be going out and doing additional survey? We had independent review. You may not call it independent because we were paying them, but we don't think you can pay Columbia University and Scripps to give you the answer you want. So we believe that was independent. Secondly, the independent peer review panel, the notion that they're not independent as the state's appointed geologists and seismologists, you know, 6 out of 7 of them, again, other than Supervisor Gibson, agreed that this work is appropriate, our selection of technology is appropriate. Supervisor Gibson got, I think, most of them to agree. They don't, on that panel, have currently the data processing and some of the other high technical aspects. That was the remaining issue. We believe our earlier independent review did. And finally, flipping to slide 12, one more, I think. Sorry, I'd already advanced. One more, maybe. There we go. On mitigation and monitoring, and this, I'm sorry, I gave you a different version of the slide deck. It should say mitigation and monitoring because the first several, that was the right slide. As was discussed earlier, if we come within 1.1 miles of a baleen whale or schools of dolphin, we have to shut down. If we come in within 0.6 miles of any marine mammal, the ship has to shut down. The firing of the air guns or sound sources have to cease, and the ships have to stop. Staff mentioned they didn't believe that this mitigated the impact. Stopping your work, I don't know what else could mitigate the impact, but we think that is one of the strongest mitigations here. State and federal marine mammal monitors, we have 5 on the Langseth, 3 each on 2 scout boats. We have 24 people walking the shore looking for strandings. I mean, this is the $8 million monitoring program that is part of this larger $64 million project. We believe, I mean, in Pacific Gas and Electric supported cap and trade. We are environmental stewards. We're trying, being forced to do this, we are trying to mitigate things to the fullest extent possible. And we believe working with NIMS and the Fish and Wildlife Service, federal permitting agencies, the Department of Fish and Game, that we've done that. And on fish take, I really want to emphasize this. Department of Fish and Game had a draft scientific collecting permit. That's what would allow us to take adult fish. That said 0. We would get to take 0 adult fish. Obviously, we couldn't begin our work if a prop from the boat were to strike an adult fish. We'd be done. We'd have to stop. We've asked for, and if you grant the permit today, Fish and Game is open to a de minimis level of take of adult fish that would be the equivalent of a party boat. 10 fishermen taking the bag limit per each species of fish. So, 30 fish in a species per day. there will be far more savings from the commercial fishermen that won't be able to fish during the course of this survey. And I'm glad I just brought that up because I had to pencil in. We had, last night, we signed an agreement with both the Morro Bay and San Luis Bay commercial fishermen to compensate them for their not being able to fish during these 10 days and perhaps 17 days with the deployment and breakdown. So that is a done deal. Both have signed. We have now signed. We provided that to staff, I'm sorry, only about an hour ago. And so that takes care of, well, I should say, takes care of. That is one aspect of compensating commercial fish. The other aspect will be that they are still able, if any one of the fishermen says, I've got a unique case, or any onshore business, a charter boat, anybody else, can come through our claims process and make a claim, assisted by the Joint Fisheries Office, the liaison office that assists people with oil spill issues, to help them make their claim. And then if they don't like the outcome of that claims process, they can go to a third-party arbitrator that PG&E will pay for to try to get it increased or get an award where they didn't otherwise. So that was, the latter part of that was asked by State Lands Commission. So we've got, we think, a very fulsome compensation mitigation program. Staff also addressed the fact that PG&E had no mitigation for what we might do to the fishery. It's true that we haven't posted a bond or set up an amount of money if it turns that we have, in the 10 days period here, for some reason we have a long-term impact that we didn't see as we were doing the work. We have not set any money aside. The public utilities process is to say, when you have an impact like that, you come to us and ask for ratepayer payment. Ultimately, if we've done the harm, our shareholders would bear that cost. So I think that's the reason you haven't seen a plan for it. We don't believe it's going to happen, but certainly you know where to find us. So that's the answer on the mitigation issues. Next slide is simply those entities that do support the California Seismic Safety Commission, the Public Utilities Commission, the PUC's Independent Peer Review Panel, the California Energy Commission, and I want to point out this one, and it's in the quotes. I put some quotes in the letter. California, the Diablo Canyon Independent Safety Commission was created by a PUC Attorney General decision a number of years ago. These are folks appointed by the AG, by the governor, and by the chair of the PUC, totally independent. They wrote a letter saying they thought this needed to happen now, and we didn't know about it until a couple of weeks ago. So we think, you know, that's a pretty good sign of independence on that. And then in closing, and I made it under that 5, the issue, really the essential issue, and I appreciate that commissioners are not used to this. You're dealing with land use issues typically. You're dealing with cases of hotel development or housing development. This is one of public safety pitted against environmental protection, and I know how difficult that is. So we acknowledge that. In real terms, the question is greater clarity of the seismic hazard at a nuclear plant justify what the State Lands Commission and NIMFs have characterized as an insignificant long-term impact? I'm sorry, I said NIMFs. I should have said the National Science Foundation. They were the ones that did the environmental assessment at the federal level. Numerous mitigation measures would halt the project if outsized impacts are seen. We've selected, as I've indicated, a very small portion of the original project to prove this. And we would consent to all the conditions that staff have pointed out, both in their staff document, their initial report, and the addendum. And finally, as I mentioned, Dr. Kent is here and our other experts if you have questions after public comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now.